I absolutely want to thank Representative Delisio, Representative Solomon, and Representative Grove. We introduced the bill in a modified form last session. Due to the great feedback and the amendments that we'd gotten last session, we've incorporated all of those into the bill. This is something that I would tell you the administration is doing a great deal of now. They've got an office that is already doing lean implementation. I applaud the governor's office for doing that. What this does is it somewhat codifies it going forward in the process. Lean is something that I've done for a living, which means I need to get a life, and I understand that. But what it does is it helps streamline operations so that the dollars that we're receiving are going for the best possible use for the people that need it within the Commonwealth. And it's designed to tie into performance management metrics that the administration would decide upon. So it actually reinforces the capability of what administration would be able to do. And it ties in very, very nicely with the current bill that was passed last year from Senator Mensch on performance metrics and the SMART Act that that Seth Grove, we just made you senator, that Seth Grove has pulled together as well. And it's all part and parcel of a coherent structural system so that they all work together and they're seamless in their operations. And that's the purpose behind the bill.
Questions or comments? Representative Delisio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ryan, last night I did hit the OPE website, Office of Performance Excellence, and one of my concerns is that that process that you described, that currently the administration is undertaking, is pretty well spelled out there. And my concern is that does this legislation do anything to change that path that they are already pretty far headed down, or does this add to that? Because there is the concern would be if there's any conflict, or if this were to become law, would this take away from those efforts that are happening now, or does it supplement those efforts?
Great question. And based upon the feedback that actually you had provided last session, this actually supplements what the administration is currently doing, and it's designed to dovetail in very nicely. But here's where there could be some help going back and forth. Say if as a result of current OPE and other lean initiatives that the governor has in GoPro and other types of activities, if the Auditor General or someone, when they go through and do a performance review, might come back and say, wow, this is what you're currently doing. You might want to also look at this metric, or perhaps this metric doesn't perhaps reinforce where you're trying to go. So it would be more advisory in nature, but completely it's designed to be part of a coherent system and tied directly in with the OPE and other performance metric type systems. So it's designed to reinforce as opposed to contradict.
And this emphasis here, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, is on the audit function piece of it, because, and again, my review last night was pretty quick, kind of perfunctory, not an opportunity to have dialogue with the administration in any substantive way. So that is the emphasis on this bill and the audit portion of it, where currently that information that I gleaned last night was on the process of what they're doing currently in terms of looking at their agencies.
What this does, and what I like in concert with what the governor is doing, to answer your question specifically, yes, it's an audit function that basically says, here's what the governor's office is already doing, and the review process would be using that template in those work papers. Very similar to how we do the audit now with the auditors and the Auditor General are taking the work papers that currently exist. So it actually ties in a greater working relationship as opposed to reinventing the wheel each time. So the performance audits then would be based upon what OPE is actually doing. So it's actually a seamless transition, and it provides an even greater reinforcement of a system that's already been established within the executive branch. It's a good symbiotic relationship the way it's structured. And that's the way lean is supposed to work, as opposed to be contradictory.
Say that again, please.
It's supposed to be symbiotic rather than contradictory. And based upon your feedback last session, that's what we tried to build into it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Dush.
Thank you. And Just one thing I wanted to highlight. The governor has actually implemented this at one point when we were trying to merge 5 different agencies. No one in the executive branch even knew what Lean or Six Sigma was. And as a result of what came out during those hearings, there was a stop put to that, and the governor has actually started implementing it. What they were doing in effect there was trying to create a Fortune 100 company with $34 billion, and they had no one who was familiar with what industry at large knew. I mean, right down to my equipment operators knew what Lean and Six Sigma were. But we had nobody in the executive branch that had any understanding of that. Taking these processes and starting to use them and implement them within state government is already yielding results, and I commend the governor for doing it. What this does is it codifies it. It makes sure that we are actually using these processes on a continuing basis, because the problems that got us to where they were looking at trying to create one entity out of 5 was because we had 5 separate systems that were failing, and we knew it, but we were trying to use people who had no understanding of how to incorporate the type of things that we were looking to do in a way that has been successful and profitable for business. And what this does is ensures across future executive branches, administrations, that we get a continuing emphasis on making sure that the processes are done in such a way that the things that we are taking money from the taxpayers for, they're getting out to our human services providers in the field, they're getting out to the people who we actually are taking the money to get it out to provide benefit for the constituents here in Pennsylvania. I think it's a great way to have the Auditor General ensure that that continues going forward, and I commend the maker on this. Thank you.
Representative Hohenstein.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Ryan, I do absolutely appreciate the fact that you are working here to, as you say, create a leaner government. I mean, we do have to spend our resources wisely, and it makes a lot of sense. I have a couple different questions, so I hope you'll indulge me. One thing at the very end, where we're talking about where the money would go that would purportedly come out and be saved, would go into the reserve fund. I wonder if there's been any thought given to maybe taking a slice of the savings and allowing the agency that is then saving the money to get a percentage of the benefit, maybe a 10%, 15%, but something that would incentivize the agency to both cooperate with the performance audit and then implement the recommendations. Has there been any thought given to possibly adding that type of a provision?
We've looked at We've looked at a whole bunch of different issues. The intent of this is, and what we would tell people, that when you're doing a lean implementation, it's not designed. Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, my question is giving the agency itself the opportunity to have a percentage of the savings come back into its operating budget directly for the next fiscal year or even for that fiscal year. That's why this would be a little different.
Yeah, I just want to double check, and that's why I noticed when you were somewhat caucus, and I want to make sure you're doing.
My more learned colleague was just letting me know a little bit of how the things were working.
If I use that term, more learned colleague, that would be all of you in this room. So we realize where that's coming from. In this particular case, the real intent upon lean, and I encourage everyone to please be aware of this, is not designed from the perspective of savings. I would tell you that the purpose of this is designed to utilize and streamline it so that the citizen is better served and in a much more lean way. So I would encourage you in this not to look at it from a savings perspective. So there's tremendous latitude in this performance audit perspective that it would be utilized as the department requires it. Let me tell you that provision in there about the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund. We had an audit of the school bus transportation fund. We identified $13 million that came about in one of the audit from the Auditor General's review, and the money came back from the school districts that had been expended. So that actually became a supplemental increase to the Department of Education's budget. So this is basically saying in that type of an event, should that occur, and there's a clawback from an agency that received it, that type of fund would go in, as opposed to a streamlining of the agency. So there's no intent in this in saying if you streamline an agency, that budget is reduced. That would be part of the appropriations process, and that's actually the change that Representative DeLucio recommended and Representative Grove recommended last session. So this is only when there's a clawback that type of provision would apply. And I hope that makes sense for everyone. So if you're pulling money back from an outside agency that came back and it were to go back into the department, you would do that. And I would not envision this bill as being predominantly used for that. That's actually part of a separate piece of legislation so that you would be able to address that separately on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. I have an additional question on the definition of major state agency. The $100 million budget figure. That's correct. What budget are we talking about? An operational budget, a budget that the agency controls in terms of its funding?
It's the total.
How is that defined?
It's the total budget that the agency controls. So if it includes pass-through dollars, that would include that type of an agency. But that type of an audit is significantly easier to deal with because you've realized it's pass-through dollars in terms of the process. But it's designed to hit only the major agencies. And again, that was a major request that we'd had from both Representative DeLucio, Representative Solomon, and Representative Grove last session as well, so that we didn't get into the weeds on this type of thing and cause the Auditor General's staff to get just completely sidetracked on all these types of types of audits.
And finally, there hasn't been a financial impact analysis on this bill yet.
Not yet. The latest estimate that we had from last session, the total cost of implementation would be about $2 million annually for the first 3 years.
Okay. All right. I don't have any further questions this time. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Solomon, did you have anything?
Yeah, quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's the $100 million threshold. If you look at, is that all inclusive in terms of all budget, any federal monies coming in,
That's
everything?
Correct. That's correct.
And so how many offices, departments, authorities, boards, or commissions would that be?
We're looking somewhere now between 12 and 13.
12, and that's where you're getting the, did you say $2 million per year?
$2 million for the 3 years. After it becomes fully operational, the cost is negligible because you've got the system already built.
Thank you.
Representative Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that conversation, I was looking page 9 at the top. Does Treasury need notified, and are they the ones we should be directing to move the money to the Budget Stabilization Fund internally? Just a thought that we should maybe think about for potentially a floor amendment, because I don't know if budget can do the transfer, or does it need to be Treasury?
It would actually have to be a Treasury, but I was told I actually had to do that in a separate bill, so I've got a separate bill already crafted to do that.
Okay.
I can share the bill because we actually ran into that issue in the school transportation funding issue that came up. But you're correct, it is the Treasury. The Budget Department would notify the Treasury so that any type of transfer would have to be made.
Oh, that's good.
If you think an amendment needs to be done to clarify that, I'm willing to do that.
Just a thought.
Okay.
Representative DeLucio.
Point of clarification, is the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund also known as the Rainy Day Fund?
Yes.
Thank you. And how does the money get back out of that rain? I know in my 8 years in office, I think there has been 1 or 2 deposits, and I believe that may have been under the current administration. So even though it's required, somehow the legislature finds its way around it. Do you know how that money is then it gets back out of it? Because I'm thinking that these are limited resources, and I guess maybe was that your question, Representative Grove? No. So So,
Well, specifically to tie in with Representative Grove brought up, typically the treasurer would have to make the transfer in. And the way this bill was designed initially was that the budget secretary would then identify the amount to be transferred, notify the treasurer. We've got a separate bill to be able to do that. But to answer your question about how does the money get out of there, I understand it has to be appropriated out. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it's never, since I've been here, we've never had any money in it to know.
No, that's taking money out of the rainy day fund as part of the budget process. It's done in the budget process.
taking it out is part of the budget process.
Correct.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
putting it in can be part of the budget. As part of this budget, we put, that was the governor's recommendation, but we put money into the rainy day fund also in the current budget. Representative Grove?
It's state law requires a 2/3 vote of the members of the General Assembly to remove it out. Under Governor there was a budget under Governor Rendell that language, because it's statutory, was repealed. Line 1 spent line 2. So there's a mechanism to go around the 2/3 requirement as well, statutorily.
It's a long time ago. Any other questions or comments?
I have one final one.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the definition of the qualified performance auditor, one of the things in there mentions having experience with private entities. And now Representative Dush was talking about, we wanted to make sure that the people looking at this are looking at something that they know. Why would we include somebody who only has, or potentially has only had experience working with private audits, not public audits?
Generally speaking, what's happened is it's a relatively new concept in the public sector. I've actually written a book about it, and so we're expanding it greatly. Pennsylvania and a couple other states are probably the two states that have some of the greatest amount of experience. This is merely saying is have someone who's had experience doing it in the past, but it's not exclusive, just private experience. It basically says that you have had to have had some experience to do the performance audit, or you won't know what you're looking at.
Correct. And it seems that this contemplates, and you yourself were talking about the idea that a lot of this has to be farmed out. Sometimes even the current audits that the Auditor General does gets farmed out. And that seems to be what would happen, at least in the early stages of this bill, because of the lack of internal staff who would have the experience? Or do you believe that the Auditor General would be hiring people with this skill set and bring them into the fold so that everything's kept in-house? What's your vision of it?
That would, generally speaking, be up to the Auditor General, but I'll give you an example how the governor does it. A group called Mantech is a group that's currently used, and that Mantech organization provides lean training. And the way you do it in both the private sector and the way the governor has already done is you train the trainer. So that's why there's an initial upfront cost. It's very similar to what we would consider with the software package that the governor and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania currently uses. You train the trainer, then that then becomes a repository of experience and knowledge within it. We do that frequently in the military as well. And so that's why there's that initial upfront cost. I would envision, if you were to ask me if it were my responsibility, I'd bring in a group that has experience in doing it from the private sector or public sector that's had experience doing it in the past, train a group of people that the executive branch and the Auditor General staff would identify as those people that would be effective trainers going forward. Then those people then would train the staffs of the various agencies that they're dealing with, or in this case, the Auditor General staff would train those people initially. So that's the reason for the upfront cost.
Thank you. One final point of order. I just want to be clear. Has either the administration, and what is the position of the administration and the Auditor General's office right now on this bill?
The Auditor General's office has been working with us very closely on all of these issues. I've not specifically reached out to the governor's office on this. Last session, there were some questions that came up from both Representative DeLucia and Representative Solomon that I think incorporated some of the concerns the administration had, if that's accurate. And then we've modified the report based upon that as well. But again, I've not heard back from the governor's staff in the process.
And I've not heard affirmatively from the governor's office, or anybody, but I've also not heard negatively from anybody that they're opposed to this. Representative Dush.
Yeah, Representative Hohenstein, I just want to follow up too. relatively new, but the 193rd Special Operations Wing, for example, has been using this since around 2010. So it's been around. The special operations community first got this ball rolling within the federal government, and then it started to spread into Big Blue, the Air Force wide, Army wide, and that sort of thing. And the federal government is implementing it as well in several ways. But Temple University, I think, is where we were sending the folks from the 193rd. So you're going to have a group of people who are able to, through the military or whatever, possibly already have those skill sets that are already within state government. And the governor has, like Representative Ryan's been saying, has already implemented that train-the-trainer process. So those skill sets are there, and it's growing within government, and it's having like I said, it's having a good effect.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Representative Webster.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Ryan. Really appreciate this. As you know, in my military experience, and we've talked about that, the federal government's been working its way through these initiatives. I had a couple of questions that were answered along the way. The only one still playing in my head is if you could talk just a little bit about the sort of the capacity issue. 12 or 13 agencies in 3 years. Does the Auditor General worry that there's limits there of how he can put forth the capability to get all that rolling?
The reason I came up with, and when we did this last session, the number about approximately $2 million, again, that would have to be refined with the fiscal note, came about was based upon the anticipation that there would need to be some outside resources to be able to be, for that very capacity issue. And that's why we limited it based upon some feedback from Representative Solomon, Delissio, and Grove. We limited to the $100 million as well, because there would not have been the capacity otherwise.
This is good government in action, so we should do this.
Thank you. Representative Delissio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Ryan. I do remember, obviously, when this bill came up for a vote previously in committee. I believe I was a no vote, but had quite a list of comments. And very appreciative that you had approached me subsequently to say you had reflected on those comments, thought they had merit, and Rep. Solomon, yourself, and I did have a series of conversations. Some of those conversations did absolutely involve the governor's office. So I am going to be a yes vote on this bill today. I still think it needs work, and I am a big believer in collaboration. So I would like to, my yes is predicated upon that we'll continue those level of discussions, including the administration, so that, heaven forbid, we're not really working at cross purposes, but can mutually achieve the goal that everybody has here, which of course is using taxpayer money, which we all are, as judiciously and wisely as possible with the best outcomes we can get. So that will be my reason to get this bill out of committee, is to continue the conversation. So thank you for all the effort this session.
And I want to again commend you. I think the three of you have been tremendously helpful in this entire process. I really appreciate the chairman and the committee. But these two bills, and I appreciate the level of dialogue, these are big deals. These are about the last two bills, about good government. And I think from the relationship that we've all established about being collaborative in the effort, and I appreciate the level and the spirit of cooperation that we've received. And I really appreciate, as an example, the last vote that was a unanimous vote. It's difficult in these types of initiatives to do that, and I appreciate that level of support across the board. I think you know me well enough to know that our intent is to remain to be collaborative, and I do appreciate the governor's efforts as well to streamline government and to do. So I think we all have the same intent in mind, and that's to do a decent job with the resources that have been provided us from the taxpayers. So thank you very much. You're a big part of the reason this bill is here today.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Chairman Boyle.
Just wanted to point out the Office of Administration actually opposes this bill. And I guess my main concern about this bill, beyond it being overreaching, is just the overall cost. You had put out the figure of $2 million. The Auditor General's office, in communication with us, says that this actually has the potential, this bill, if implemented, if it impacts every agency, which they do expect that it will, that this could actually cost in the tens of millions of dollars, not $2 million. Have you factored into your budgeting on this bill maybe the need for the Auditor General's office to hire additional auditors to do all this auditing?
That's part and parcel where the $2 million comes from. The $10 million number would be stunning to me because I've done this in major systems and major organizations before, in some cases about the same size as the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that would mean that it would not be done in a collaborative approach with the administration. So typically what would be done is you would use the existing effort, as an example with OPE and other type of lean systems that the governor has done with GoPro. So as a result of that, you'd be using existing systems. Now, the total cost on the executive branch side might be $10 million in that case, and I don't dispute that because they are systems that take place. I would be stunned if the audit, and I've done this for a living, I've done it for 40 years. I'd be stunned if the audit function that even remotely cost that, and the result of the $2 million number that come by, and I stand by that number, I worked on it with the fiscal office in the prior term about where it would come from, would be that combination of folks utilizing the existing lean staff that exist in the agencies, as well as the work papers that would already be developed to make sure that it's being audited appropriately, and then if necessary to bring some outside people in that are capable of doing it as well.
But you do accept that the overall impact to the Commonwealth overall, not just the auditing aspect, could be in the tens of millions?
That would be on the side of the executive branch for the initiatives that they're already undertaking. That's got nothing to do with this bill. So if the governor is deciding that he doesn't want to go lean on the other activities, which has not been the indication that we've received from the executive branch, then I would say then it could be. But at that point in time, then it would not be working in concert with the OPE because then the governor would be abandoning his own programs.